The world had changed. The year was 1942, a time when the globe was buried under the smoke of gunpowder and the screams of war. It was then that one man stepped toward the mountains from which no one ever returns. 82 years. This is no ordinary length of time. In these 8 decades, governments rose and fell, new cities were built, and entire generations passed away. But in the white, merciless depths of the Alps, time had frozen, in a place where even death itself turns to ice. For years, there was only silence. But a hot afternoon in 2024 finally pulled back the curtain on an old secret that, perhaps, should have stayed hidden forever. As the ancient ice melted due to global warming, what emerged from beneath sent a shiver down the spines of those who witnessed it. It wasn't a stone, nor was it the wreckage of an old plane. It was a human. No, it was a general. His body was perfectly preserved, as if he had only fallen asleep yesterday. He wore the same old uniform, the same polished metals that were once symbols of absolute power. But the most startling sight was the leather bag gripped firmly in his hand, a bag he refused to let go of, even in the throes of death. But the question isn't just who he was. The question is, why was a high-ranking general carrying such vital documents alone on that desolate glacier? Was he fleeing the war, or was he on a mission so secret it could have rewritten the map of the modern world? To find out, we must travel back through time to that cursed, freezing night when General Hans, pseudonym, stepped out of his bunker for the last time. Outside, a blizzard raged, and enemy forces were just miles away. His subordinates pleaded with him, "Sir, this is suicide." But the general's eyes held a madness seen only in those who fear something far greater than death. What was that thing? What was the secret that drove him into the jaws of a frozen hell? According to military reports of that era, General Han's disappearance was the greatest mystery of the year. No wreckage was found, no trace remained. He was declared missing in action. Yet, some whispered in hushed tones that the general had vanished on purpose, because he possessed something that, if fallen into the wrong hands, would mean the world we live in today might not exist at all. For 82 years, this general remained entombed under a shroud of ice, as if time itself had forgotten him. But nature has its own way of settling accounts. When the ice finally gave way and the first ray of sunlight hit his face, his eyes still mirrored the same terror they held on that final night in 1942. When the forensic team arrived, they initially thought they had found a common soldier. But the moment they saw the golden stars on his lapel, the team stood in stunned silence. This was the man history books dismissed in a single line. He disappeared into the white hell. Now that this secret has surfaced, experts worldwide are desperate to know, what is inside that leather bag? Was it a formula to end the war? Or perhaps the map to a treasure that remains hidden in those mountains to this day? One thing was certain, General Hans had returned, and he brought with him questions that we might not be ready to answer. The discovery site was immediately cordoned off. What started as a routine observation by climate researchers quickly transformed into a high-stakes military and archaeological operation. This wasn't just a body, it was a biological time capsule. Because the ice had excluded all oxygen and kept the temperature at a constant sub-zero, the general had undergone a rare process called adipocere formation, but on a level rarely seen by science. His skin was like tanned leather, his facial features, the sharp jawline, the furrowed brow of a man in deep thought, were so intact it felt as though he might open his eyes at any second. As the forensic teams moved in, the atmosphere was heavy with an eerie tension. They weren't just handling remains. They were handling a man who had seen the world's darkest secrets. The primary challenge was the thermal shock. If they removed him from the ice too quickly, 82 years of preservation could vanish in minutes, turning him to dust. They had to build a specialized pressurized tent over the glacier, a mobile laboratory designed to mimic the freezing conditions of the mountain while they worked. The lead forensic pathologist, Dr. Aris, pseudonym, noted something peculiar during the initial scan. While the general's uniform was tattered from the pressure of the shifting ice, his right arm was locked in a rigor mortis that had been snap-frozen. He was clutching that leather satchel to his chest with such force that the straps had become embedded into his uniform's fabric. It wasn't just a bag, it was a part of him. But as they began the delicate process of cleaning the frost from his uniform, a second, more chilling discovery was made. The general wasn't alone. Just 3 meters deeper into the ice, the thermal scanners picked up another silhouette. Smaller, differently shaped. It appeared to be a communication device, a high-powered, long-range radio transmitter that shouldn't have existed in that portable form in 1942. Why would a general, a man of his stature, be carrying his own heavy radio equipment into a blizzard? Usually, a general is surrounded by a battalion, protected by a wall of soldiers. Yet, here he was, isolated in the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. The forensic team found no bullet wounds, no signs of shrapnel, and no broken bones. He hadn't been killed by the enemy. He had been stopped by the mountain itself. But even as the cold took his life, he had stayed upright, facing north, toward a destination that was never on any official military map. The mystery deepened when they checked his pockets. They found a silver watch, frozen at exactly 3:14 a.m. They found a photograph of a woman and a child, but the names on the back had been methodically scratched out with a knife. This wasn't a man who wanted to be identified. He was a man who had erased his own history before the ice did it for him. The most intense moment came when the team attempted to retrieve the leather satchel. As they applied a specialized de-icing solution to his frozen fingers, they realized the bag was sealed with a wax stamp, a seal that belonged to a division of the High Command that officially never existed. This was the Ghost Division, a group rumored to be involved in the pursuit of technologies and artifacts that bordered on the supernatural. The media began to swarm the base of the mountain. News had leaked that the vanished general was no longer a myth. But the military was quick to intervene. Within 6 hours of the discovery, the site was declared a national security zone. Why? Because the initial X-ray of the leather satchel didn't show paper. It showed something metallic, something dense, something that was emitting a very faint, almost undetectable thermal signature. As the sun set over the Alps, the general was finally airlifted in a cryogenic chamber. He was being taken to a secure underground facility, away from the eyes of the public. The world was asking who he was, but the experts were asking something much more frightening. If he has been frozen for 82 years, and the ice has finally let him go, what else did he bring back with him from 1942? The extraction was over, but the real investigation was about to begin. The bag was about to be opened, and the history books were about to be burned. The journey from the jagged peaks of the Alps to the sterile, white halls of the Sector 7 underground facility took less than 2 hours by military transport, but for the scientists waiting there, it felt like an eternity. The general was placed in a specialized cold room, where the air was kept at a biting -15 degrees Celsius to prevent any biological decay. He sat there, under the harsh glow of LED surgical lights, a silent, frozen titan from a world of fire and steel, now surrounded by 21st century sensors and fiber optic cables. The focus of the entire room was not the man, but the leather satchel. It sat on a stainless steel table, glistening with a thin layer of frost. This was the moment of truth. Dr. Eris and two senior intelligence officers stood behind a blast-proof glass shield. Using a robotic arm to avoid any physical contact with potential biological hazards, they prepared to break the wax seal of the Ghost Division. As the robotic blade sliced through the leather, a strange sound echoed through the speakers, a faint, metallic hiss, like gas escaping a pressurized chamber. The air sensors in the room spiked. For a second, the heartbeat of every person in that room stopped. Then, the bag fell open. What spilled out was not a stack of military orders or a map of hidden bunkers. Instead, the team stared at a series of black, metallic plates, no larger than a modern tablet, but far heavier. They were made of a material that defied immediate identification. Neither steel nor titanium, but something that absorbed the light around it. Alongside these plates was a small, cylindrical device made of polished obsidian, etched with symbols that looked less like a language and more like a circuit board. "This isn't 1940s technology," whispered one of the technicians. And he was right. As they carefully laid out the contents, they found a small, handwritten journal tucked into a hidden side pocket of the bag. Unlike the scratched-out names in the general's pocket, this journal was written in a frantic, desperate hand. The ink was faded, but the words were legible. The first page didn't contain a date. It contained a warning. The cold is the only thing that can keep it quiet. If the warmth reaches the core, the transmission will resume. The forensic team realized with a jolt of horror what the thermal signature they had detected on the mountain actually was. It wasn't heat from a battery or a chemical reaction. It was a pulse. The device was alive, or at least it was active. Suddenly, the lights in the laboratory flickered. The high-end computers, designed to handle terabytes of data, began to glitch. Lines of code began to rewrite themselves on the monitors, forming geometric patterns that mirrored the etchings on the obsidian cylinder. The general, sitting just 5 feet away, seemed to change in the flickering light. For a split second, a technician swore he saw the general's chest move, not a breath, but a vibration, as if his body was acting as a conductor for the device on the table. Dr. Eris ordered an immediate shutdown of the facility's external grid, fearing a massive electromagnetic pulse, EMP. But it was too late. The obsidian cylinder began to glow with a faint, cobalt blue light. It was a beacon. Historians were quickly brought in to cross-reference the symbols. They found a match, but not in any military archive. The symbols were identical to those found in an uncharted cave system in the Himalayas, discovered and then suppressed by the government in the late 1930s. The Ghost Division wasn't just a military unit. They were seekers. They were searching for the origin of human technology, and it seemed General Hans had found it. The general's final mission wasn't to win the war for his country. His mission was to take this source and bury it where it could never be found, under thousands of tons of moving ice. He had sacrificed his life to act as a permanent guard for a secret that was too dangerous for the 20th century. But now, 82 years later, the guard had failed. The ice had betrayed him. As the blue glow from the cylinder grew brighter, filling the sterile room with an ancient, haunting hum, the team realized that they hadn't just found a dead soldier. They had activated a countdown that had been paused for 8 decades. Outside the facility, birds began to fall from the sky. Satellite signals across the European continent began to drop. The general's transmission hadn't just resumed. It was calling out to something. And somewhere, deep beneath the earth or high above the atmosphere, something was beginning to answer. The facility was now running on emergency red power. The cobalt blue hum vibrating from the obsidian cylinder had become a physical weight in the room, a frequency that made the scientists' teeth ache and their vision blur. But amidst the chaos of crashing servers and flickering monitors, Dr. Eris focused on the only thing that remained silent and analog, the general's handwritten journal. As the team worked frantically to shield the cylinder with lead-lined blankets, Eris began to translate the frantic entries. The journal wasn't a log of military tactics. It was a confession. The general, whose real identity was now confirmed as General Ernst von Stoller, hadn't been a hero of the front lines. He had been the director of Project Kronos, a secret initiative tasked with reverse engineering artifacts that fell from the sky during the Great Meteor Shower of 1938. December 12, 1942, the journal read, "The High Command believes this device is a weapon. They call it the Vanguard. They want me to bring it to Berlin to turn the tide of the war. They are fools. It is not a weapon of destruction. It is a weapon of displacement. It doesn't kill the enemy, it calls them. I have seen the shadows it casts when the light hits the core. They are not human shadows." The scientists frozen in the room exchanged terrified glances. The general hadn't been hiding from the enemy. He was hiding the device from his own government. He realized that if the Vanguard were ever activated in a major city, it would act as a homing beacon for whatever, or whoever, had lost it thousands of years ago. The script of the journal became more erratic as it reached the final pages. Stoller described how the device began to speak to him, showing him visions of a world covered in ice. He realized that the only way to silence the beacon was to subject it to absolute, extreme cold, a temperature the technology of the 1940s couldn't maintain artificially. His only choice was the heart of the Alps, inside a glacier that had remained frozen since the last ice age. "I am walking into the white death now," the final entry stated. "My lungs are burning, and my heart slows with every step. But as the frost takes me, the blue light fades. The Vanguard is going to sleep. I will sit here as its jailer. If I am ever found, if the ice ever fails, may God have mercy on those who wake it." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the lab. It wasn't the equipment. It was the general. The vibration from the cylinder had caused the ice crystals within Stoller's cells to shatter. His body, once perfectly preserved, began to rapidly dehydrate and fracture. But as his physical form crumbled, something else happened. The transmission didn't just stay in the room. Outside, on the surface of the mountain, the sky began to swirl into a localized aurora borealis. Even though it was midday, the stars became visible. In intelligence centers from Washington to Beijing, alarms were screaming. Every satellite passing over the coordinates of the facility was being blinded by a massive surge of ionized radiation. This wasn't just a local glitch anymore. The general's discovery was triggering a global atmospheric event. The military officers in the room received a frantic radio patch from the surface. "Sector 7, come in. We have multiple unidentified thermal signatures appearing, not on the ground, but inside the mountain. They're moving through the rock like it's water. They're heading straight for the lab." The realization hit Dr. Eris like a physical blow. The general wasn't just a guard. His body was the final off switch. By removing him from the ice and allowing his body to deteriorate, they had broken the seal. The jailer was gone, and the inhabitants of the shadows Stoller described in his journal were finally coming to collect their property. The obsidian cylinder's glow shifted from cobalt to a blinding, searing white. The lead blankets meant to shield it began to melt. At that moment, the facility's heavy blast doors began to buckle inward, groaning under a pressure that shouldn't exist. There were no sounds of engines or explosives, just a low, rhythmic thumping, like a massive heart beating deep within the earth. General Stoller had stayed frozen for 82 years to prevent this exact second. And in their curiosity, in their greed for premium secrets, The modern world had just invited the 1942 nightmare into the 2026 reality. The silence of the underground lab was shattered by the sound of screaming metal. The heavy titanium blast doors, designed to withstand a nuclear strike, didn't explode, they warped. It looked as if an invisible force was kneading the steel like dough. Dr. Eris and the security team retreated to the far corner of the room, their weapons raised, though every man in that room knew that bullets were useless against a force that could melt glaciers and bend satellites. Through the gaps in the buckled door, a mist began to pour in. It wasn't the white, cold steam of liquid nitrogen. It was a dark, oily gray vapor that moved with a terrifying intelligence. It didn't dissipate. It crawled along the floor, defying the ventilation system, heading straight for the obsidian cylinder. As the mist touched the stainless steel surgical tables, the metal turned to brittle frost and shattered into thousands of pieces. "Get the cryo canisters," Eris shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He had realized the only truth left in the general's journal. The cold is the only thing that can keep it quiet. The security team scrambled to activate the emergency liquid helium spray, a last-ditch effort to drop the room's temperature to near absolute zero. But as the nozzles hissed to life, the mist reacted. It rose from the floor, forming a towering, humanoid shape that flickered in and out of existence. It had no face, no eyes, only a void where light seemed to die. The temperature in the room began to fluctuate wildly, jumping from freezing to a searing, blistering heat in seconds. Suddenly, the obsidian cylinder on the table began to levitate. The white light it emitted was now so intense that it turned the walls of the lab translucent. Through the glowing concrete, the team could see the skeletal structure of the mountain itself. They weren't just in a lab anymore. They were inside a massive, ancient machine that the mountain had been built around. The Alps weren't just mountains. They were a shroud for something much larger. The humanoid shadow reached out a flickering hand toward the cylinder. As it did, the remains of General Stoller, now mostly dust, began to swirl in the air. The dust gathered, forming a ghostly, translucent silhouette of the man as he looked in 1942. For a brief, harrowing moment, the ghost general appeared to stand between the shadow and the device. In the chaos, Eris grabbed the general's journal, flipping to the very last page. One he hadn't seen before because it was written in a hidden ink that only became visible under the cobalt light of the artifact. It wasn't words. It was a mathematical sequence, a frequency. "The radio," Eris screamed, pointing to the 1940s transmitter they had recovered from the ice. "We need to broadcast this sequence. It's the interference pattern. It's the mute button." The technician dived for the old radio. It was a primitive piece of junk compared to the supercomputers in the room, but it was analog. It was immune to the digital virus the cylinder was spreading. With trembling hands, he began to dial in the frequency from the journal. Click. Static. Click. The humanoid shadow froze. The white light of the cylinder pulsed angrily, vibrating so hard that the glass observation shields shattered into dust. The air in the room became ionized, smelling of ozone and ancient earth. Outside, the aurora borealis in the sky turned blood red. The global satellites, which had been blind, suddenly started receiving a single, repeating message in Morse code. "Silence the peak. Silence the peak." The technician hit the final switch on the 1942 radio. A low-frequency hum erupted from the speakers, a sound so deep it felt like it was coming from the center of the earth. The reaction was instantaneous. The humanoid shadow shrieked, a sound that wasn't heard by the ears, but felt directly in the brain. The obsidian cylinder dropped to the table with a heavy thud, its light fading back to a dull, harmless black. The dark mist began to retreat, sucked back through the cracks in the door as if a vacuum had been turned on. But the victory was short-lived. As the lab stabilized, a deep, rhythmic thudding began to shake the entire facility. It wasn't the shadow. It was the mountain. The sequence hadn't just muted the cylinder. It had triggered a self-destruct mechanism that had been dormant for millennia. "We have to go? Now," the security commander yelled, grabbing Eris by the collar. As they ran for the emergency elevator, Eris looked back one last time. In the dim, red emergency light, he saw the silhouette of General Stoller one more time. The ghost wasn't looking at the artifact. He was looking at Eris, and he was saluting. The general's long watch was finally over, but the mountain was about to take everything back. The glacier had melted, the secret had been told, and now the Alps were preparing to bury the truth under 1,000,000 tons of rock and ice. The elevator doors slammed shut just as the first structural pillar of Sector 7 snapped like a toothpick. They were going up, but the world they were returning to was no longer the one they had left. The Vanguard was silent, but the arrival had already been logged. The explosion didn't sound like a bomb. It sounded like the Earth itself was sighing. As Dr. Eris and the remnants of the security team breached the surface, the ground beneath them plummeted. A massive sinkhole, nearly a mile wide, swallowed Sector 7 and the ancient machinery hidden within the mountain. Millions of tons of snow, rock, and ice rushed in to fill the void, creating a thunderous roar that could be heard across 3 countries. In seconds, 82 years of history, a 1942 general, and a device from the stars were buried once again, this time forever. As the dust settled, a heavy, unnatural silence fell over the Alps. The blood-red aurora vanished, replaced by a cold, clear sky. The global satellite network flickered back to life, and the Morse code signal ceased. To the rest of the world, it was reported as a massive seismic event, a natural disaster caused by the rapid melting of glaciers. But Dr. Eris, standing on the edge of the new crater, knew the truth. He clutched the only thing he had managed to save, the general's leather journal. Back at a secure, undisclosed location, the investigation into the General Hans incident was officially closed by the highest levels of government. All video footage from Sector 7 was scrubbed. Every witness was sworn to a lifetime of silence. But the questions remained. What was the Vanguard? And who was really sending that Morse code message? Silence the peak? Decades later, a retired Dr. Eris finally decrypted the very last page of the journal, a page that was written in a code so complex it required modern quantum computing to break. It wasn't a military code. It was a biological one. The general's journal revealed the most terrifying secret of all. The Vanguard wasn't a beacon for an invasion. It was a quarantine lock. The entities Stoller saw in 1942, the shadows, weren't coming from space. They were the original inhabitants of Earth, trapped beneath the permafrost since the last great cataclysm. The general hadn't been protecting a weapon. He had been holding the door shut from the inside. The Morse code hadn't been a command to the military. It was a message from them, a warning to the surface world that their jailer was gone and that they were now watching, waiting for the ice to disappear completely. Today, as we look at our warming planet and our melting glaciers, we often think of what we are losing. We think of the rising sea levels and the changing weather, but we rarely think about what we are finding. In the last 5 years, more frozen mysteries have been uncovered than in the previous century combined. From ancient viruses in Siberia to unidentified wreckage in Antarctica, the ice is giving up its secrets. General Ernst von Stoller was the first to face the white hell, but he won't be the last. As the glaciers continue to recede at an unprecedented rate, Experts warn that there are at least 12 other peaks around the world that match the thermal signature of the Alps discovery. 12 other jailers. 12 other locks. We spent 82 years wondering what happened to a missing general. We spent millions of dollars to uncover his body and his bag. But in our quest for answers, we forgot the most basic rule of the mountains. Some things are buried for a reason. The general's watch may be over, and his body may be dust, but his journal remains a chilling reminder. As the final entry says, the sun is the enemy of the truth. While it shines, the ice melts. And when the ice is gone, the shadows will no longer need a beacon to find their way home. Next time you see a headline about a shocking discovery in the melting permafrost, don't just look at what they found. Ask yourself what they woke up. Because the Earth is full of secrets, and 82 years was just a blink of an eye in a much longer, much darker story. The ice is speaking. Are we finally ready to listen?